Come and find the one just for you.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
.07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. It's time for Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And we need to adjust the electronics because they talk to each other. Gotta love technology when it works. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, as I said, for Congregation Eitz Chayim. Your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast, and here we go, getting ready to share my world with my world.
Your world is already being shared on YouTube.
I see that, but now it wants to come up, and it wants to not have me be me, which is a real pain.
Well, is it somebody kind of interesting that we might like, or the singer, or something?
No, it's trying to not be me. Okay, there we go. So now it's shared. I love technology when it works.
Oh, boy.
So it's a beautiful Friday in front of what the forecasters tell us will be a tad chilly for Florida. I think very chilly, and my plants are sitting there going, what are you going to do about us? So we're probably going to try to keep them warm.
Watch out for falling iguanas.
Yeah, I did like that one meme that I saw on Facebook, lizard warning, where the B in the sign had malfunctioned. And, of course, Floridians, aside from hopefully recognizing that lizard only has one Z, caught the joke in lizard warning.
No, they wouldn't.
No comment. Down, boy.
They went to Florida schools. That's why.
Hey. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say a couple, both of the places where I teach right now, I think are excellent. I think both Keiser and IRSC. IRSC is the top state college in the country. And they won that Aspen Award.
That's right.
Yep. That's not just Florida. That's in the U.S., rather, not the world.
Well, national competition against not only 2-year schools, but 4-year schools as well.
Right. Every college. And that's the difference between college and university. Universities offer masters and doctorates or doctors. They don't have to offer a doctorate to be a university, but they do have to offer masters. And I do believe that IRSC is heading that way.
Oh,
I definitely
I have no doubts whatsoever.
It started out as a 2-year community college with, a typical community college reputation, and has over the years, through very powerful leadership, become quite a force to reckon with. And part of that is the ability for IRSC to keep its tuition down low. It's a very low-cost degree. And, of course, the students who are on dual enrollment truly benefit from that in so many ways.
High schoolers who take advantage of that are so fortunate.
Yeah. If there's anything that I really wish we had back in the dinosaur days when you and I were young, it's that would be it. Right? Would be the dual enrollment. I took AP, and all that really did is meant I had to take a higher level college course when I got to college, because I didn't have college credits, even though I had AP, this or that. It was considered a high school, and it still is. It's better than quote unquote, but you do only, it just means you have to take higher level courses. It means I had to study Kant in German for my German credits, but I understand. Kant is not easy in English or in German. It's a very dense writer. And the joy of philosophers, applied philosophy. So, and for anybody who's hanging over since Stuart was here, we did query the Dr. Google, and according to Dr. Google, Florida has not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. So there you go, folks.
Gee, what a surprise.
Yeah. But at least
continuing the tradition that nothing ever happens in Tallahatchie.
You are in a rare mood. You're trying to get me in trouble with half of our listeners. Okay.
Is that a surprise?
This is supposed to be Ask a Rabbi, not Flame a Rabbi. On that note, if you would like to call and ask this rabbi a question, please feel free to call 772-340-1590. And also feel free to sponsor an episode if you like what you hear or if you want to have a boisterous argument with what you hear. Either way, you're welcome to sponsor a segment or 10 of Ask a Rabbi. So please call that number other times, or you can call actually during the show, and Carol will take it and be glad to help you do that. So we are looking for that. And yes, we did have the plant sale last weekend. There is no plant sale this weekend. We are on what we call an alternative Shabbat tonight, which is we vary up the service a little bit every other on even-numbered Fridays. So this is a rare month because the month started on Saturday. Right, January started on a Saturday. So the third Friday, which is when we have the hot meals for members of the congregation who order it or guests who order it, and you can do curbside pickup with that, folks. And we also feed the first responders, which have now increased in number because of the number of calls in the area and where the congregation is located. We feed the first responders nearest to the temple, and it's up near the stadium. So they've increased their numbers because of the number of calls. And we're definitely seeing infill throughout Port St. Lucie, a ton of that. This is a growing community. It's amazing how growing Port St. Lucie is now. And we're going to see more industry coming in and more of this and more of that as the numbers grow.
You see where Amazon is going to open its third facility in Tradition. Wow.
Right next to FedEx. FedEx is already operating.
FedEx is just beautiful there. Yeah. And what? Cheney Brothers is coming in there?
Yeah, Cheney's coming in there. It's going to be a big area. And my understanding from a couple of comments that I overheard from some counter folk, some register operators, at some cashiers at Publix, is that Publix will be part of a major retail that's coming in down in that same area.
Becker Road west of I-95, there's going to be a brand new Publix.
There's a ton of building going on there, and lots of things. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a back road way down toward the road that goes out toward Okeechobee sometime in the not too distant future.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah, and some of the farms that are to the west of Tradition are probably starting to look at selling.
I think those are going to be high schools. Actually, there's two on the books for west of town.
So we've got, we've really got a growing town, and which gets into the subject that I really was going to talk about today. It's a perfect segue into it, which is I was going to talk about change. Because I was thinking about climate change in particular, which is a hotly debated subject. And, of course, weekends like the one coming up that are colder than usual, that are at the low end of the temperature scale, cause people to say, well, we're not warming up, we're getting colder. And that's not the point. It's not, the planet is doing its thing and it is shifting the overall average temperature. But we're also seeing what's much more significant to me, which is climate change. We're seeing that what was once areas that froze over all the time and stayed frozen, such as Lake Erie, not doing. Now, some of that's because of the pollution in Lake Erie, folks, because that changes the temperatures at which water boils or freezes.
There wouldn't be pollution in that beautiful lake, would there?
Yeah.
Can you still walk on it, by the way? Oh, never.
Only when it's frozen. But, at least you can no longer set the Cuyahoga River on fire.
Yeah, there you go. I remember that.
And that's an interesting point because the river goes through what used to be Goodyear's property. I don't know if it still is. I've heard that they've moved, that they're no longer where they were headquartered. I haven't looked in that part of Akron recently, so anybody who's been in Pittsburgh, not in Pittsburgh, in Akron, She's doing really well today. My mouth is not listening to my head. And so anybody who's been in Akron recently or knows what Goodyear's doing these days can tell me what they're doing with buildings. But I get the sense that things are moving. So, but in the old factory building, the original factory building, the Cuyahoga runs through it or under it. They built over the river. And
I didn't know that.
Well, that was partially done for a number of reasons. But the net result with the talking about amendments and things like that, the EPA requires that the water leaving the plant meet a certain standard. So Goodyear has had to clean that river for decades.
I would hope so.
Yeah, as opposed to dumping stuff in it.
Oh, they were good corporate citizens. I can't see them doing that.
So one of the things that I like to talk about is how narrow the world is, or how small the world is. I was sitting with somebody a couple of years ago, right before COVID, at a restaurant, having dinner, and they start talking about something called the Uniontown dump. See, they worked in Jersey in construction, and they used to send their garbage, their toxic garbage, out west to the Uniontown dump. I lived 3.1 miles from that Uniontown dump, which became a super cleaner, right, a super site for the EPA.
Oh, brother.
Because such toxic things that were dumped in it and in barrels that eventually leaked.
And rumors that toxic waste dumping had been done under the site for, Jets and Giants Stadium.
Yeah. All kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've got to find Jimmy. Never mind.
Jimmy Hoffa is sitting in one of the end zone seats.
Anyway. And all of those wonderful rumors. But anyway, so it was interesting to me that somebody who lived in New Jersey, who really didn't know where Uniontown was, brings up the subject of this place that they used to send the toxic waste. And I'm like, yeah, that's, children there have a much higher incidence of leukemia. Now, recognizing the science of that correlation does not mean causation, but it's powerful sometimes to take a look at it. Yeah, you have to do a little more rigorous scientific study than saying that just because something happened, something else, or two things happen together, that one causes the other.
There are no real coincidences in life.
First time is an accident, second time's coincidence, and third time's enemy action. Yeah, I remember that rule.
Oh, my goodness.
So, what I was thinking about in terms of climate change and the fact that the planet is shifting and changing is that it's not just weather that's changing, it's also language. And this is also prompted by a discussion. I actually managed to keep my tongue firmly locked behind my teeth as a couple of people near me were having this big discussion about whether or not the Bible and how much of the Bible is the Word of God. And it's not a discussion. So here's the rabbinic answer to that, which is if we're going to look at divine language, at most, it is in the first 5 books. After that, it becomes more of a history. It becomes the story of the transitions of power, the battles. Yes, there are lessons in there, but there's not the kind of legal scription going on. And it sounds like we do have somebody calling in. And is that Joe that I see?
I think it's Jeff, I think.
Jeff, okay. That's what I get for trying to read across the room. Okay, thank you for calling in, Jeff. What's your question or comment?
I just wanted to mention to you that my grandparents used to live across the Delaware River, and the other side of the river was DuPont's. And they died, in their 60s, both from cancer, And they used to have funny colors of mold or stuff. I don't know if it's mold or not. I was a kid. I just remember this when Grandpa was there. I used to sit down there in the basement. He used to come up, Grandpa, what's all that green and purple stuff going on the wall? And I guarantee you something leached from that river because that river was so black you couldn't, you used to go down and walk on the rocks to look at the water.
Wow.
You're absolutely right about that. The pollution that's been done, God only knows, if there's time left. But anyway, that's what I just wanted to mention.
Well, thank you for that, Jeff. So I'm going to repeat that, Jeff, because the people who are on the Facebook feeds and the live feeds don't hear your phone call. And so Jeff was commenting that his grandparents lived by the Delaware River, right? And by Corning. I almost went to work for Corning, by the way, a long, long time ago. It's one of the places that had offered me a position as an engineer. Long, long time ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. Anyway, but they used to dump their stuff in the river because there was no regulation. And people were of the opinion that it would dilute itself and just flow out into the universe. And as opposed to what we learned in Biosphere 2, which is what you throw into the bay, as Tom Lehrer would say, you have for lunch. And, they understood that. So Jeff was talking about mold and stuff that grew on the walls of the house of his grandparents and wondering what was in that river. And I, too, would wonder what was in that river because glassmaking is not a gentle process by any stretch of the imagination. And cleaning up the toxins that we use and learning to produce products less toxically. Pollution is one of the reasons for all of the outsourcing. Because one of the worst industries for toxic stuff is textiles. The printing of fabrics.
Oh
yeah. Right. Lots of toxic stuff go into the manufacture of clothes. The dyes, the sizings, and all of the other chemicals that put into clothing to make them easier to produce or to even just produce them. Paper making, a very toxic. The Bible, interestingly, talks about leather tanning as a very toxic, There are special provisions for people who marry into families who do tanning because they are entitled to extra compensation for going into that, marrying into the families that had that production.
Wow.
Yeah. So pollution is not something new. We've known that it's a problem. Right? Mad as a hatter. We might not have known why hatters got a little crazy and seldom died a natural death. Thank you, lead and mercury. Right, were used to make the fancy hats. But we've always known that there are byproducts to our stuff. So again, thank you for that question, Jeff. And people know those kinds of stories. There's factories where kids downstream tend to be born with more birth defects. Cancers often have a chemical trigger. And folks, here's one to really consider. Here's one that I'm just going to recommend. The people who have household cleaners under their sinks, move those out into your garage where you're not there. Yeah. Especially now that we're moving off of glass and into plastic. Plastic tends to do a lot more of something called outgassing, which means that the chemicals that are there come out of the containers. That's why you can smell it when you walk down the chemical lines in the supermarket. It's not that people have spilled it. It's that it's coming out of its containers. It will eventually depart. And here's something to think about. If you've got a product under there that has ammonia in it, and you've got a product under there that has chlorine, you're creating chloramine gas, which in very small doses will only make you sicker, but can be lethal in large doses. It's when people use two different cleaners in a bathroom, for example. It's why they stress the need for having a lot of ventilation when you clean a bathroom, because the chemicals used are so toxic. And, unless you go to a much more gentle, more natural set of cleaning products, I strongly recommend moving those out into a container in your garage so that you only get them out when you actually need them.
Wow, interesting thought.
Yeah.
I know we've got some. I'm just thinking,
a lot of people do and don't realize it.
Yeah.
And you're So here's an interesting study, and I don't know of anybody who's done it. I'll have to research it. But to see whether or not people who clean their homes a lot tend to have cancer, tend to get cancer. We know that chemicals can trigger cancer, and the doctors are, by threat of lawsuit, are being forced to keep quiet about it.
Well, and you hear now about some warnings for pets of these Swifter products, and apparently there's a chemical there that affects dogs and cats.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of some of the fresheners that are used. Right. There's a lot of things for pets. Pets are very sensitive. Parrots even more so. There was a number of years ago, back in the early days of Teflon, where when people would first use the Teflon container, if they weren't careful, it could kill birds. What it gave off the first time it was heated in your pan. They've changed the formulation and it's not anywhere near the same. Yeah, subtle things that are just, it's scary, the things we will kill in our customer base, including our customers.
What gets me is to see some pictures of some South Pacific islands with these huge areas of plastics.
Yeah,
in the
swirling ocean. In the collections of plastic.
Oh my God!
And I'll give some kudos to Holland America. The last cruise I took, I've only taken 2 in my life, and a shout out to Jim and Sandy for taking us on a cruise, because I wouldn't probably have gotten there without it. But Bill and I took a tour of the backside of the ship, the behind the scenes tour. And one of the things that I noticed, and we talked about because we're engineers, was they have a pressure for aluminum, and because they serve water in aluminum bottles.
Wow, I didn't know that.
To reduce the likelihood of a bottle of water, a plastic container, falling over.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
So, yeah, the joys of it all. And I was very pleased to see that, they do contain, and they crush down the plastic and make little lumps of it so that they can take it to recycling. So, yeah, there was definitely a move in that direction. People don't realize how much that kind of equipment costs to retrofit into a ship. But ships do a lot of stuff, and I'm sure feed the fish periodically.
I think, yes, one of the major cruise lines was fined several times for that.
Yeah, it. I'm sure it happens. And we tend to think, and that's not a new human behavior. I've talked other times about it. There's a trash dump outside Jerusalem called Gehinnom. It's been the trash dump since before Jesus. It's been there a long time, and they've burned trash there. And that's why you hear about the fires of Gehinnom. It's about the trash dump. Never a fun place, and it's certainly not where you'd want to be thrown when you die. That's what gets translated into this idea of fiery hell, saying that it's in Jewish scripture. It's not. It's telling you that if you don't live a good life, you're not going to have friends and family that are going to take care of your body. They're going to just throw you in Gehinnom.
Oh, God.
They're just going to throw you in the trash dump, and you'll end up in the trash fires. Because you got to burn the trash, or you attract animals and stink and disease and stuff. And they knew that. They knew that
back then.
Even back then. The stuff that can't be eaten is what's burned on the fire. If you read scripture carefully, it's the fat, it's the entrails, it's the dung. That's what's burned, because if you don't burn it, it's going to attract all kinds of things that you don't want. And they figured that out by observing it. It's not rocket science, folks. It's just basic life. And so life changed very slowly back then. It still changed. And I compare the changes that we're going through now to say what life was like in 1775. I've talked about Williamsburg before. I like colonial Williamsburg, the foundation. Extremely wealthy power in that part of Virginia. Not going to deny that. It's one of those places that turns you upside down and you smile while they empty your pockets. But on the other hand, they also do a very important service of showing us what life was like in the 1770s in colonial Williamsburg. The people, the reenactors, the folks who interpret the history for us, are set in that period, and they talk in that time, and they're wearing the clothes of that time. And language has dramatically changed in the 250 years since then.
Was it more Queen's English back then?
Well, or the King's English.
Close?
King's English, right? We didn't have a queen, we had a king.
Oh, all right.
William and Mary, right? That's how the college or the university got its name.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Right.
never thought of that.
Williamsburg.
Williamsburg.
Okay.
Sure. Okay.
All right. And it was a very common thing, right? That was one of the ways that people got the names of towns and locations. That's one of the things that they were named for. And so people talk there in a slightly different English. Now, I don't think they have the accents that probably were common back then, but they do talk about, for example, people being above stairs and below stairs. You don't go upstairs, you go above stairs. You go below stairs. Because it's a level, right? Yeah, it makes complete sense, and you'd understand it, but it's a different speech pattern than what we use today. And there are different speech patterns between the U.S., between the Australia, and England and Ireland and different English-speaking countries, just as there are different Germans among German-speaking countries. Because language continues to evolve locally. Now, we do have what I will call a homogenizer, which is TV and radio and movies, and the language that's used in Southern California, thanks to Hollywood, propagates. And so it becomes the norm. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a Midwestern English as well, just because of the flux of people and how these things have worked out over time. But language has changed.
And that was taught in broadcasting school.
Yeah.
You want to give that Midwestern kind of a tone.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's definitely moved down to Port St. Lucie along with Brooklyn and the Bronx.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, that too.
Thank you, Metz. And all of the advertising where, that population was highly targeted thanks to spring training. And I understand that. And we have a large influx of that population. All of that being said, the kids growing up today, the children, they don't remember that world. Their world is different. But what they do recognize is that change is happening in their lives. And I believe, as both a psychology and a philosopher, that over time, being exposed to that pace of change will make them more open to new information. I think that the world and its pace and its implications are going to change. I can see it in the students when I talk with them. They are more open to things. And the older students, in some ways, are a little more closed. Not completely, because otherwise they wouldn't come to college or university to learn new things. And that's part of what the act of going to college and university is about, is to learn something. It's to acknowledge that there's an area about which you need some expertise, not just the little piece of sheepskin, not just the click on the box that says, yes, I took that course, but to actually learn something.
One of the players on the bus last week asked me, how did you live without a cell phone?
Yeah.
I said, oh, quite nicely, thank you. Oh, gosh. Yeah.
The days of Pac-Man, too, right?
Oh,
Remember that? Games on the TV, because it was the only place you could do them?
Well, I never was into that, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Bill and I broke into that, and that was one of our impulse purchases as young newlyweds. was a game thing for the TV.
There you go.
And of course, in the early days, they all came with Pac-Man, whether you wanted it or not.
And that was about 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's because I'm only 29, even though I've been married for 40 years. Yeah. Got it. I keep I always have told Bill that he's robbed the cradle, which he did. He's older than I am. It's one of the teases in our family. But the rate of change has an interesting effect on people. So the older generation has seen change happen much more slowly. And I'll liken that to when we moved to Tucson. I had taken the position in Tucson, and I was commuting between Ohio and Tucson. Great for the trips out to Tucson because I'd leave early in the morning and I'd arrive early in the morning. It could do a full day's work. On the other hand, going back the other way, I lost a whole day because of the time change. 3 hours was much more difficult than 2. 2 was a piece of cake. 3
Well, now, how long were you commuting?
About 6 months.
Oh, gosh.
So I would go out twice a month and do services and meet with people and then fly back. And I still had a congregation in Pennsylvania where I was the rabbi, so I was split. So, yeah, I had to commute. And then there was the commute from Ohio to Pennsylvania. Not long, but a couple hours.
It's like the first 6 months that we were on the air at ESPN, I was going out to back to San Diego, because Carol was still under contract out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you do what you do.
Yeah.
And so for the first few months, I just rented a place. And eventually it became time to buy, and that was in one of the real estate boom periods. It was the beginning of that bubble. And I can remember saying to my husband, well, we need to find a house. We need to buy the house and make the move. And he said, well, why don't you pick out 7 or 8 homes that you kind of like and give me the addresses, and then I'll come out and I'll look at them and da-da-da-da-da-da. He said, if I do that, we'll never have a home. I said, you don't understand the market right now. If I see a house that we like, I have to bid on it that minute. Or we're not, because I'd already lost 2 homes that I'd looked at because they went off the market in the time that it took me to start looking.
And we know that we're going through that right now.
We're going through that right now here in Port St. Lucie. It's a seller's world.
You bet.
And so the house that we ended up living in, and that actually, it would be funny because one of the things when I talked to Bill, I said, would you ever like to go back to Tucson? He said, I don't know if we can get our house. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So he really likes that house. But when we saw it, it had come on the market at 9 o'clock. I was meeting my realtor at 9:30 or 10, I forget which. But it had come on the market right that morning, and she said, I know we're scheduled to go look at XYZ homes. Let's look at this one. And so we looked at it, and we wrote a bid in the driveway. And by the time she took it over to the seller, it was the second one in, but I had outbid that first bid.
Wow.
And that's because, are you ready for this? Because I put that wonderful clause in that said if another bid is received, we are willing to go X amount over it. And we did end up going X amount over. So, yeah, and we lived there for many, many years. And then, of course, the bubble burst, and we rented it for a few years until we could sell it. So, yeah. Oh, well. Such are the joys. So time is changing and time is interesting. And we do have to be ready to act, sometimes very quickly. And I think that today's students, today's young folk growing up, are more in tune with that than the older generations, because they have seen the rate of change and the change in language, which is where I was going. So that not only when we're dealing with scriptures, here's the tie-in, not only are we dealing with the fact that scriptures was originally written in Hebrew, the New Testament, the Christian scriptures in who knows exactly what, probably Greek, because the Roman soldiers were mostly Greek and spoke Greek, but also Latin. So, who wrote what and what? Another good question. And But certainly the Jewish scriptures were written in Hebrew. And so if you're dealing with a translation, every translation is a judgment call. God doesn't make the translation. Even though there is a tradition that says when God gave the 10 Commandments, the 10 utterances, they were simultaneously given in all 72 languages of the time. I'm sure there were more than 72 languages, but 72 is just the word for universal.
And we all saw that in the Mel Brooks movie.
Yeah, when he dropped that tablet. And we'll never know what those other 5 were, as my husband likes to say.
Oh, my.
But so you're dealing with translation, and then you're dealing with the change in language. A perfect example of that is when we hear the story about Pharaoh's dream. Right? We hear that Pharaoh saw corn stalks. That's not what the Hebrew said. It's grain growing. Sheaves of grain. Why is it corn? Because the British word for grain in England is corn. That's why maize is called corn, because it was a grain for which they didn't have a name.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So it didn't keep the name maize, which was the local word for it. It became corn, and corn squeezins, right, when you ferment it.
See, I thought that maize was an Indian terminology.
Who was here, sir?
The Indians.
Yeah. So in the native language, it's called maize.
Yeah.
And it's still, if you in Spanish, it's maize.
That too. Yeah.
Right. Because the Spanish asked the locals, "What is this?" and they said maize. Okay. So yeah. But it's called corn because that's the general term for grain. So Pharaoh doesn't have a big, beautiful green corn stalk with yellow ears of corn. First of all, yellow is a domesticated and developed color of corn, as is white. Natural corn comes in many shades and mixed. It's only cultivated for what visually appeals to a European-based market in America.
And we all know it's grown in a can.
Yeah, it grows in cans, little. Someday I'll have to draw that, right? A sheaf of corn with a sheaf of grain with corn stalks on cans. Gotta love it. Yeah. Thank you, Birdseye and DuPont, not DuPont, Del Monte.
Del Monte, yeah.
Great canning companies, and definitely an important part of life. And now we plastic wrap everything, shrink wrap it, and all these other ways of packaging.
Well,
stuff.
and and talking with the manager at Publix, he was talking about how your vegetables may be very rare in cans coming up.
Yeah.
Because of this crazy shortage.
Well, it's interesting. It's been shrinking. It's been shrinking.
We do all fresh produce, so we don't.
And more and more people are, because we're better and better at transporting that. Although there's a dark side to that, as there is to everything, which is that they're picking the fruit, they're harvesting the fruit earlier and earlier, and so it hasn't yet developed all of the nutrient quality that it needs to be in the ground to do, because it's not picked ripe, it's picked pre-ripe. And
maybe pesticides too.
Oh, definitely. That's the whole idea of Monsanto seeds. That it has to do with tolerating Roundup, and where do you think that Roundup goes? Yeah.
Water table.
And your plants. Your plants drink it. Right? That's what they're trying to produce. They're trying to produce a plant that will still grow with high amounts of that in it. And if it's in it, who's eating it? Hello. So, and yet, it's one of the things, I'm going to take a real left turn here. It's one of the things that the Gines knew, that farmers can't be nonviolent. They have to kill the insects, or the insects will eat their crops. And because the Jain religion is very strongly anti-violence, very pacifistic to the extreme, they say that it's very hard for a farmer to be a giant, just because they have to kill the insects. So, and it's worth noting in Biosphere 2, they had a real problem with how to contain the insects that inadvertently ended up inside their organic farm area. They didn't call it organic farming at the time. But when they came in, they couldn't use the heavy-duty pesticides because there was no way to filter them back out. And they didn't want them in that enclosed environment. So they used to have to go out every day and squish insects to try to control it, and use soapy water and things like that were safe to eat to control the insect population. And it was a major issue. And in some cases, the insects actually won. Some crops could not sustain life with the insect threat.
I wish that we would have still been in Tucson when they had Biosphere. That project sounded simply amazing. I
happened to trip across their site, and I don't know what COVID has done to it, but I have heard that they've added new behind-the-scenes kinds of tours where you can get a better view of what was going on and what life was like for the first 8, and then they did a smaller redo on that experiment. It wasn't as big and it wasn't as long or as many, and it still had some of the same psychological problems that the first one did, which is that when you've got people in a confined, resource-poor environment where there's no way for them to get ahead of the power curve, they just couldn't get ahead of the power curve, and so food was scarce. Now, today, I think they could grow more. I think we know more about how to cause our plants to produce more, and perhaps we'd preload it with some vitamins and things like that they may not have done as well on. Because we certainly know more scientifically than we did when the first 8 went into Biosphere 2. And if you don't, folks, if you're listening to this and you don't know what Biosphere 2 is, Google it and look at it. There's some great YouTubes out there on it. There's Jane Payton wrote a book called 2 Years and 20 Minutes. That's her rendition of what she experienced living through the 2 years. And she's the one who injured her finger and was taken out and brought back because they did surgically deal with that. So it's the one breach, well, one of a couple breaches into the complete lockdown. They did eventually have to dump some oxygen in, and that was just a lack of knowledge about concrete. And that's unfortunate, because that led to a lot of the hostility inside the biosphere, inadvertently. Life is interesting.
Now, was that in the foothills, or I don't even
It's up
know
in
where
Oracle.
It was located.
It's up in Oracle.
Okay, yeah.
So you head north as if you're going to go to Phoenix, up the I-10, and hang a right and go through the hills. And it's a beautiful area. It's well worth the tour. I don't know what COVID's done to their tour schedule. They've got facilities there that groups can rent for conferences and stuff like that. The University of Akron now owns it. I think it's Akron. Not Akron. University of Arizona. I'm thinking U of A. That in Tucson. And they're doing tremendous experimentation on new growing techniques. They're also doing some work on the importance of having gardens in your apartment, on your terrace, and on your roof, particularly for places like Phoenix that are so heavily asphalt concrete. Heat sinks. That's why it's so hot in Phoenix.
Valley of the Sun.
Yeah. Well, and you've got stuff that just absorbs it and re-radiates it, so even the nights don't cool off.
And again, for folks who have never been out there, that's the difference between Phoenix and Tucson. Tucson is high desert. I mean, it's 3,500 feet.
Yeah. Tucson is higher, so it's a little bit cooler, and much less, although losing some of that, much less asphalt and concrete. And where we lived in Richmond Heights, our street was paved because we were on the main bus route to the school, to Holloway, that was just down like a block or two from our house. But all the houses behind us in that allotment are on unpaved streets. And that keeps the temperature down just a little bit.
Well, when Carol and I were at KVOA, of course that was Really, when the dinosaurs were rolling.
Yeah, and everybody rode a horse to work.
And well, it was, and we, at the main entrance to KVOA, there was a horse's hitch.
Yeah.
In the parking lot.
Yeah, people don't realize that, right? Tucson was a place that horses' hitches were in front of stores for a long time. Yeah. Oh, these things that we've changed and don't even realize it. And so getting back to it, today's youth sees much more change, and I think they're more open to change. They have to be more open to change because they've lived through it, because the rate of change is accelerating. We have more new things this year than we did last year, or the year, well, not counting COVID and whatever it's done to the blip on things. And yes, I do have a ring on my finger that says Gamze Ya'avor, this too shall pass. Because when you're in the thick of it, just as the saying goes, it's hard to, when you're trying to drain the swamp, or when you're up to your rear end in alligators, it's hard to remember you were trying to drain the swamp, which may or may not, never mind. But when we're in the midst of fighting COVID and the current Omicron spike, it's hard to remember that plagues come and go. Pandemics come and go. They do go. It doesn't feel like it, but they do go. And that's, now I'm really going to take a left turn again. I do so many left turns, I turn around in a circle. That when people commit suicide, they think that the situation's never going to change or improve. And that's not the story of life. Life is always changing. The situation is always different down the road. And you might be surprised at where it will take you over the long haul. Or to put it very simply, to the glass, it doesn't matter if it's half empty or half open, or half full or half empty. But to the human looking at it, it makes all the difference in the world. And we do self-talk ourselves into things a lot. And so the exposure to change can help us be more positive, more open to things, because it's kind of like Florida weather. Wait 5 minutes and it'll change. Life is really that way. Wait 5 minutes. There was a psychologist who wrote a wonderful book called Can You Wait Till Friday? And what that was is that somebody had called him in the middle of the night on calling for help, who was thinking of suicide, and in his sleep, because he was completely awakened from being sound asleep, he said to the person who called, "Can we talk about this Friday in the office?" And the person said, Sure, I'll wait until then. I'll wait until we talk." And he realized then that part of what causes somebody to actually work on the idea, to actually commit suicide, is a lack of hope. But if you're looking forward to something, then if you become forward thinking, not forward thinking as in liberal, but forward thinking as into what's it going to be like at some point in the future looking, then you build hope. And that hope is probably one of the most powerful emotions that we can have. And, it's not necessarily a hope in a miracle, but just a hope that life will continue to progress and change and be different. So becoming more aware of change and looking at it. And, it's a little bit hard to learn how to program a new phone. It's a little bit hard to, I wasn't happy to learn how to run Mevo, but you do it a couple of times and it becomes second nature. You move it from conscious memory, which is hard to work in, to automatic memory, much easier. So I don't have to think about how to turn it on. And yes, I heard it on the...
It's second nature.
It's second nature now. So I know to listen for the beep that tells me it really did turn on, instead of just pushing the button, the lights come on, and then it says, "Oh, you didn't really mean me," and turn off. So that's one of the things, right, that I've learned over time. And yes, it said that in the video that I watched on it. It said, "Hold it until it beeps," and I just didn't pay attention to that because we block so many things out of our attention in our effort to grab things quickly. We are highly inattentive beings, and I love showing students the gorilla experiment, where the gorilla comes through the screen and you don't see it, because we have selective attention. If you want to know what that is, contact me, and I'll be glad to send you the link to the video.
Wow.
Lots of interesting things out there. So the bottom line is that humans have a lot to do. We have a great deal to do with what's going on in our lives, and we influence it by the language we use around it and how open we are to change and new information. So, yeah. Things will work out. The arc does bend toward morality and goodness because people, I believe, are inherently good. And we see that in babies. Babies tend to do what's right until they learn that they can benefit by cheating. Yeah. You have to realize that cheating is an interesting piece. It means being able to analyze enough to see that just doing the right thing, sometimes you can take a shortcut, or you think you can take a shortcut. Perhaps it's a deception.
There are no shortcuts.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I used to watch my dog. One of my dogs actually lied to the other one. This is a fun story. I'll see if I can do it in 2 minutes. But I had 2 dogs, and we used to give them each, this is many, many years ago, before I was married, and I lived at home, and we had 2 dogs. And we used to give them each like a milk bone or a treat. And the one dog would eat hers immediately, and the little boy would sit there and guard it between his paws. That's all he'd do. He'd sit there and guard it. And after a while, the girl who'd eaten hers got annoyed at his sitting and guarding his bone. So she would go and behind a chair and pretend that she was burying something back there. She'd scratch in the carpet, and she'd let her rear end show out in the and then she'd move away from it as if she had buried something back there. And after a while, the curiosity got to be too much for the little boy, and he would leave his bone to go find out what she had buried.
God.
Yeah, the second that she could make it to his bone faster than he could turn around, boom, she'd zip in and grab it. And the thing about this was that it wasn't something that only happened once in a while. She pulled that on him like Charlie Brown. Like Lucie and Charlie Brown and the football. She pulled it every night for nights on end until we finally started giving him another one and breaking it up so he'd eat it. So she learned to lie, and she did benefit. She got extra milk bone. What can I say? Animals learn it too. We are hopefully a more evolved animal, and hopefully getting better every day. I like to think that we are. I think we're getting better, and that life can be exciting and interesting. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and this has been Ask a Rabbi.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL Global. We're talking the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world, WPSL Port St. Lucie.